of all sorts. And I'm guessing that if I decided instead of giving a few words to ask you about all the crazy family reunion stories you had, we'd probably be here till 10:30, and some of us would be falling asleep by the end. It's somewhat perfect, I think, that on this Shabbat Hanukkah, we are usually reading the story of Joseph. And if we think to what we know about the story of Joseph, we have pretty much one of the most dysfunctional families that we have record of in our holy texts. We've got sibling rivalry. We've got parental favoritism. We've got jealousy, hurtful words. You name it, we've got pretty dysfunctional family here. But this week we've also got a reunion. And it's a strange reunion because most of the parties of the reunion don't realize it's happening till next week. I'm talking about the moment, of course, that we read this week where Joseph has already become the chief minister in Egypt, and he's in charge of rationing food during these years of famine. And his brothers from the land of Canaan have come down to Egypt to get food. Now, they don't know that or expect to see Joseph, but what happens is they sort of get a family reunion. And the Torah is a little strange here, so I'm going to read you the verses in Hebrew, and I'm going to translate it. I'm going to tell you why it's a little bit of a strange moment. We read that Joseph saw Vayar Yosef et Echav Vayakirem, and Joseph saw his brothers, and he knew them, he recognized them. Vayitnaker alehem, and he made himself unknown to them. Vayidaber itam kashot, and he spoke to them harshly, and he said to them, "Where are you from? Me'ayin batem?" Vayomru, and they said, "We're from Canaan. We came to get food." And then we read again, Vayaker Yosef et Echav, and Joseph recognized his brothers. Vehem lo hikiruhu, and they didn't recognize him. Now, just listening to the translation, you might not really hear anything unusual, but it turns out that this is a really unusual moment. First of all, the Torah seems to tell us twice that Joseph recognized his brothers. And many of us know that if the Torah is telling us something twice, this is sort of problematic for our tradition, because we like to believe that our Torah has no extra words. So if it's going to tell us something twice, we tend to think, well, why is this telling us this twice? But the other issue is that after Joseph recognizes him the first time, Vayitnaker alehem, he makes himself unknown to them. So I was curious about this. I didn't know what this meant. What does it mean that he made himself unknown to them? And like any good rabbinic student, what did I do? I went to talk with my best friends, commentators from the 12th century. And yes, sometimes in rabbinical school it does seem like they can be our best friends. And I found some interesting things. The first thing I found is the words of Rashi. Rashi is one of our most famous biblical commentators. He lived in France some 1,000 years ago. And he says that Vayitnaker, he made himself unknown. He says that word comes from the word nochri. Vayitnaker, nochri. And nochri means stranger or foreigner. So in that moment, Rashi is suggesting that Joseph was so Egyptian, he was so other when he spoke to them harshly, and when he had this moment, that he was actually making himself foreign. In other words, the brothers couldn't recognize him because there's no way that a son of Israel, Jacob, could be so Egyptian sounding and so harsh to them. It's a troubling commentary because it seems to imply that just because he seemed Egyptian, just because he seemed other, he was speaking harshly to them. He was acting in a way that was cruel. I wasn't satisfied. I wanted some more commentary on this, and I wanted to find something else. Lucky for me, about 100 years after Rashi, 100 to 150 or so, we get a commentator that we know as Nachmanides. Not Maimonides, he's off somewhere in another country. Nachmanides is the Ramban with an N, and he understands this a bit differently. He says, Vayitnaker, that action Joseph's doing to make himself unknown to his brothers is actually not from Nochri. It has nothing to do with that word, and so Rashi can't be right. It has to do with Heker, that same thing that Joseph recognized them, Vayaker, but then he Yitnaker, he turned it around and made himself unknown. He disguised himself with maybe a physical disguise. But Ramban also suggests, and this is what I really appreciated the most, he also suggests that maybe it was Joseph making himself unrecognizable to his brothers through his actions and his harsh words, motivated by fear that they might try to once again throw him into a pit, perhaps. Joseph acted in a way that was so alien to them because it was so against his true nature. He didn't want to estrange his brothers, but because of his fear, because of his darkness, he did so anyway. He did so with his words. And Ramban goes even further. He says explicitly that Rashi is wrong because Nochri, a stranger, doesn't necessarily have to speak harshly. Joseph, in fact, had in himself that harshness all along. And it was his motive out of fear that he came to act the way he did. Sometimes people surprise us. We surprise ourselves even sometimes with actions that might not feel aligned with our truest selves. When we have that gap between who we ought to be and who we want to be and what we do or say, we're doing what Joseph did in that moment. We are mitnakering, if you will. We are making ourselves unknown to those who are around us, to those we love, by our actions or our deeds. But I think by recognizing that that's what Joseph did in this moment, or at least that's how I'm interpreting it, and we can discuss more in Torah study tomorrow morning. But by acknowledging it, we have a chance to choose the opposite. We can choose not to make ourselves unknown and act in a way that pushes those away from us and causes more pain. We can choose kind words instead of harsh ones. We can choose forgiveness instead of revenge, like Joseph seems to do here. Even in the darkest of situations, we can share the light of our truest selves instead of succumbing to that darkness as Joseph did. So tonight, with our Shabbat light and with the memory of our 6th Hanukkah candles, that's okay. They go out. But quickly. I hope that we'll learn tonight from Joseph how not to handle such a situation. If we happen to have that family reunion where we're tempted to use those harsh words with a family member, with someone we hopefully love, I hope we'll remember instead that we can be vulnerable, that we can let the true self shine through instead of that action that's so foreign to our nature. Shabbat Shalom.